The Tower of Babel happened while Noah was still alive. And when that man died, God did not start over with the world. He bet everything on a single childless old man. Noah was 950 years old. He had survived the flood, had seen the entire world drown and then be reborn, had been the only man on earth whom heaven called righteous in the midst of his generation. And one day, without a thunderclap, without a sign, without any catastrophe, he simply lay down and stopped breathing. The text tells it in 2 verses, almost in passing, at the end of chapter 9 of Genesis. He lived 350 years after the flood. All his days were 950 years, and he died. That's all. Not one more word about him. I know it sounds impossible, so let's go to the numbers, because Genesis itself notes them down one by one. Most people imagine that the chaos came after Noah. The tower that tried to touch the sky, the confused tongues, the peoples scattered across the planet. It sounds logical. The last giant of the ancient world dies and everything collapses. Only it's backwards. There was a great-great-grandson of Noah in whose days, the text says, the earth was divided. The dispersion of Babel, according to the most common reading of that phrase. His name was Peleg. And according to the chronology of the Hebrew text, that Peleg died before his great-grandfather Noah. It's worth being honest. The ancient Greek translation stretches those years another way, and there the numbers change. But if we follow the Hebrew numbers just as they're written, the man who built the ark was still breathing when the world had already split into languages that couldn't understand one another. So what really happened after Noah closed his eyes for the last time? That's the question for today, and the answer resembles nothing you expect. Because after his death there were not 9 instantaneous catastrophes. There was something much stranger and much quieter. There was a funnel, think about it. The world had just filled up with peoples. Right before this part of the story, Genesis stops to do something that seems tedious, but turns out to be key. A census. A very long list of the descendants of the 3 sons of Noah, the peoples that sprang from Shem, from Ham, and from Japheth, and spread across the earth after Babel. Scholars call it the Table of Nations, and there's an ancient Jewish tradition, which it's worth taking as a tradition and not as something the text affirms in those words. That counts 70 nations in that list, 70 peoples, 70 tongues, the whole world divided into 70 branches. Keep that number, 70, because at the end of this journey it's going to return in the most unexpected way. Every language, every nation, every border that exists today began in those chapters. Multitudes spread across the whole earth. And right in that instant, when humanity was more numerous and more divided than ever, the Eternal did something no strategist would have advised. He did not speak to the nations. He did not choose an empire. He did not seek the strongest king or the richest city. He sought a single old man, childless, lost in a city of Mesopotamia called Ur. Why him? Keep that question, because it's the thread that holds up everything that comes. And keep this image too, because we're going to come back to it exactly at the end. This story that begins with the death of the man who saved the world is going to end with the death of another man who saved his family, and with a coffin, a closed coffin, in Egypt that no one opened for 400 years. Only, before reaching the old man of Ur, there's someone we have to follow first, because when Noah died, one of his 3 sons was still alive, and he didn't outlive him by a few years. He outlived him by 1.5 centuries. His name was Shem, and his mere presence, still alive in the new world, was a silent bridge to the world the flood had carried away. Before we go on, one quick thing. If you arrived at this channel for the first time today, don't leave me any like yet. Seriously, wait. Watch the video to the end, to that coffin I promised you, and if this gives you something real, then you leave it to me. And if not, no problem, you owe me nothing. But if you're already part of the family here, leave me that like in good faith, because that tells the algorithm that this story has to reach more homes. That done, We continue. There's a word that organizes the entire book of Genesis, and very few people know it. In Hebrew, it's toledot. It's usually translated as generations or descendants, but its sense is deeper. It means something like, this is what came out of, these are the ones who came after. Every time Genesis wants to turn the page from one era to the next, it repeats that formula. These are the toledot of Adam, these are the toledot of Noah, these are the toledot of Shem. The book advances like a river that keeps narrowing. It begins with heaven and the whole earth, and it ends with a single family tucked into Egypt. And the exact point where the river truly begins to narrow is the death of Noah. Because after that death, the text does something curious. It doesn't stay with humanity. It slips into a single channel, that of Shem. And the numbers of that channel are, by themselves, one of the most striking things in Genesis. Shem lived 600 years. His children and grandchildren still hovered around 400. And then, right in Peleg's generation, the one of the division of the earth, the figures collapsed to almost half all at once. Suddenly people live 230, 200, until reaching a man who will live 175. That man will be Abraham. In just a few generations, human life shrank to a fraction of what it had been before the flood. The new world was more fragile than the old. People died younger, empires grew, and God's promise still had no owner. And notice the paradox, because it's the heart of everything that comes, right in that shorter and more fragile world where no one lived long enough anymore to see much of anything fulfilled. Heaven decided to plant an oath that would take centuries to bloom. That's why it didn't rest it on a single 1,000-year giant, but on a chain of fragile people who would die soon, each one forced to trust and to hand the torch to the next without ever seeing the end. And while that staircase descended, Shem was still alive. This is what's hard to believe when you do the math. The son of Noah outlived his own father by about 150 years. Shem saw several generations of his own descendants be born and die. He saw the world become populated, and the line of the design, the one heaven was going to use to touch the whole earth, passed through him. And there's a rabbinic tradition. It's worth treating it as a tradition, not as a fact of the text, that went so far as to identify this Shem with Melchizedek, that priest without genealogy, who one day steps out to meet Abraham to bless him and immediately disappears without a trace. The text never affirms it, but the mere idea paints the picture. The last witness of the ancient world, silently holding the thread of something that had not yet begun, because the thread kept descending down the line of Shem, from father to son, until it stopped at a name almost no one remembers. A man called Terah. And with Terah, at last, the story stops being a list of ages and becomes a journey. Terah lived in Ur of the Chaldeans, and here it's worth being honest about something scholars still debate. For centuries that Ur was located in southern Mesopotamia, in what today is Iraq, one of the oldest and most powerful cities in the world. But there are specialists who propose a different Ur, farther north, near Haran. There's no absolute consensus. What the text does say, without ambiguity, is that one day Terah gathered his family and left Ur with a destination in mind, the land of Canaan. He took his son Abram, his daughter-in-law Sarai, and his grandson Lot, the son of a brother who had already died, and they set out, only they didn't arrive. Halfway along the route, in a place called Haran, the caravan stopped and stayed. The text doesn't explain why. Perhaps Terah grew old. Perhaps Haran was comfortable, prosperous enough. What's certain is that the man who had set out looking for Canaan never set foot in Canaan. He settled halfway, and there in Haran, Terah died at 205 years. He died looking toward a promised land that was not for him. He died in the waiting room. And notice the detail, because it's one of those Genesis drops without underlining. The father attempted the journey and stopped halfway. The son is going to finish it. There are dreams one generation barely manages to begin, and that are only fulfilled when someone else decides not to stop in Haran. That someone was Abram. Imagine the scene, and I ask you to imagine it for real, because the text only gives us the skeleton. A man of 75, in a city he knows by heart, with his father just buried, with a wife who has not been able to have children, with his whole world fitting into a couple of dusty streets, a man, in short, with no reason to move. The age for adventures has passed. What comes next, normally, is to stay put and wait for the end, like his father, and then, in the middle of that silence, a voice. The text presents it without preamble, at the beginning of chapter 12, and it's the first words the Eternal directs to Abram in all the Bible. In Hebrew, they're two short words, almost a blow, lej leja. They're normally translated as go, but they hold something more intimate and stranger. Literally, it would be something like, go for yourself, go toward yourself, go for your own good. It's not only an order to leave, it's an invitation to become someone. And what follows is one of the sentences that has most changed the history of the world. Go from your land, from your kindred, and from your father's house to the land that I will show you. Keep that sentence. To the land that I will show you. Not to Canaan, not to such and such river, to such and such mountain. To the land that I will show you. The Eternal did not give him a map. He gave him a direction and a promise, and asked him to walk before knowing where to. Of a man of 75, childless, he asked that he leave everything secure for a destination he wouldn't even name for him. And here enters the greatest promise of the Old Testament, the one that is going to hold up absolutely everything that comes after, to the very end of the Bible. The Eternal said to him, I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you, and make your name great, and you shall be a blessing, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. Read that last line again, because there the whole funnel is explained in a single sentence. In you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. The world had just divided into hundreds of peoples at Babel, and now God tells a single man, without a single child, that through him all those divided families are going to be blessed. The smallest, a barren old man, is going to reach the greatest. All of humanity. Heaven decided to touch all the peoples, starting with one. And do you know what Abram did with that impossible order? The text says it in 4 words that weigh more than an entire sermon. And Abram went, without arguing, without asking for guarantees, without demanding to see the map first. An old man raised his camp, loaded up his barren wife and his orphaned nephew, and walked toward a land he did not know, chasing the voice of a God who was barely beginning to reveal himself. He crossed the desert Terah didn't dare to cross, and he did not stop in Haran. But the promise, however enormous, had a problem. A problem that was going to pursue Abram for the rest of his life, and that seemed, year after year, to make everything else impossible. He had been promised a nation. He had been promised offspring as numerous as the stars. And he still didn't have a single child. The wife was aging. Abram himself was aging. And heaven, for a long time, kept silent. Until one night, a night on which God did something so strange, so unsettling, that to understand it you have to know what it meant in that ancient world to cut an animal in half. In Abram's world, when 2 parties wanted to seal an agreement that could not be broken, they didn't sign a paper. They did something much more serious. They took animals, split them in half, arranged the halves facing each other, leaving a corridor of blood in the middle, and then the 2 parties walked together between the pieces. The gesture was an oath without words. It meant, may the same happen to me as to these animals if I break my part of the deal. In Hebrew, to make a covenant was said karat beret, which literally is to cut a covenant. You didn't sign an agreement, you cut it, with blood in between. Keep that image, because what happened that night turns upside down everything you would expect. The Eternal told Abram to bring the animals. Abram obeyed, split them, arranged the halves, and then evening fell. And with the evening, upon Abram descended a deep sleep and a horror, a great and dreadful darkness. The text says it that way without softening it. It was not a pretty vision. It was terror in the darkness, and in the midst of that darkness, the Eternal announced to him the distant future of his descendants, that they would be foreigners in a land not theirs, that they would serve and be afflicted for 400 years, and that afterward they would come out from there with great riches. 400 years. Remember that number, because at the end of this video, it's going to come back, and it's going to come back inside a coffin. And then, when it was already dead of night, the unexpected happened. A smoking oven and a torch of fire appeared. And that burning presence passed between the split animals. Stop here. Who passed between the halves? Only God. Represented in that fire, the Eternal walked alone down the corridor of blood. Abram did not walk. Abram was asleep, sunk in that heavy slumber. Normally, in a covenant like that, the two parties passed between the pieces because both committed themselves, both risked their lives. But in this covenant, only one passed. Only God bound himself. Only God swore in effect. May what happened to these animals happen to me if this word is not fulfilled. The commitment did not depend on Abram's strength, nor on his perfect faith, nor on his descendants behaving well. God loaded both ends of the oath onto himself, that which holds up Israel, and in the end all the families of the earth, does not rest on a man. It rests on the one who passed alone through the fire. That word has a name in Hebrew, berit, covenant, alliance. It's one of the most repeated and most important words in all the Bible, and here, on this night of terror and fire, it is cut forever. The funnel is no longer only a spoken promise. Now it's an oath of blood that God made with himself, but the years kept passing, and the count would not close. 13 more years passed. 13. Abram was now 99. Sarai was very close to 90. And the only son in that camp was Ishmael, born of an Egyptian slave named Hagar, in a human attempt to help God fulfill what it seemed he wasn't going to fulfill on his own. And right at that point, when everyone, Abram included, had already done the math and accepted that the miracle would not come by the normal road, the Eternal appeared to him again, and the first thing he did was change his name. In that world, the name was not a label, it was destiny. To change someone's name was to rewrite who they were. And God took that old man without a future and told him, "You will no longer be called Abram, you will be called Abraham." The new name held an entire sentence. In Hebrew, it sounds like Avhamon, father of a multitude of nations. Imagine the scene. A man of 99 with a single son and by a slave receives from heaven a name that means father of multitudes. Every time someone called him by his name from that day on, they would be proclaiming something his worn-out body screamed was impossible. Father of multitudes, an old man who barely had one. And to Sarai too he changed the name. She came to be called Sarah, princess, mother of nations. From her would come kings of peoples. A woman of 90, mother of kings. The Eternal spoke in the future of things the present declared absurd. And as the seal of that covenant, God asked for a mark, not a mark on a stone nor on a door. A mark on the very body of every male of his house, circumcision, a hidden private sign engraved in the flesh, so that the covenant would not be something signed and put away in a drawer, but something worn day and night, in the very place from which the promised offspring would be born. The promise was written on the body that would have to produce it. And Abraham, at 99, obeyed that very day. He marked himself, marked Ishmael, marked every man of his camp. He wagered his entire flesh on an oath he still didn't see fulfilled. What he didn't know was that the fulfillment was a year away, and that before holding him in his arms, he would have to argue with God himself over the life of an entire city. Because while Abraham waited for the promised son, his nephew Lot was living in a city that was about to disappear from the map, Sodom. And one day, 3 visitors arrived at Abraham's camp, and after announcing to him that within a year Sarah would have a son, they rose and looked toward the valley, toward the cities of the plain. The Eternal had decided to go down to see the outcry rising from Sodom. And then one of the most astonishing conversations in all the Bible took place, because for the first time, a man dares to argue with God face to face, not for himself, but for others. We're not going to stop on what Sodom had done, nor on how the fire fell. That's a story that deserves its own telling. What matters here, in this journey that goes from all humanity to a single man, is what Abraham did in that moment. Because when he learned that the city was going to be destroyed, he did not stay silent. He drew near, and he began to negotiate with the owner of the universe. "Will you also destroy the righteous with the wicked?" he asked him. "And what if there are 50 righteous within the city?" And the Eternal accepted. "If I find 50, I will spare the whole place for their sake." But Abraham did not stop. He went down to 45, then to 40, to 30, to 20, and in the end, almost trembling, to 10. And what if 10 are found? And the answer was the same. "For the sake of 10, I will not destroy it." Notice what's happening. The man God chose to bless all the families of the earth has just passed his first great test as a blessing. He did not use his closeness to heaven to ask for something for himself. He used it to try to save others. The chosen one became an intercessor. That was from the beginning the meaning of the funnel. God did not set a man apart from the world to abandon the world, but to have within the world someone who would plead for it. There were not 10. The city fell under fire and brimstone, and of that whole plain, only a handful was saved. Lot and his 2 daughters, pulled out almost by force by the hand of angels who had to take them by the arm because they hesitated to leave. Lot's wife, who looked back toward what was already condemned, was turned into a statue of salt, a frozen monument to the people who are rescued from the fire but leave their heart in the things that burn. And the text finishes with a detail almost no one notices. It says that God remembered Abraham, and that's why he pulled Lot out of the catastrophe. Lot was not saved for being righteous. He was saved because someone was interceding for him from afar. The funnel was already working. The salvation of one passed through the prayer of another. And while the smoke was still rising from the plain, in the camp of the intercessor, the impossible was about to be fulfilled at last. A year had passed since the visit of the 3, and the text says it with a simplicity that disarms. The Eternal visited Sarah as he had said, and did with her as he had spoken. Sarah conceived and bore a son to Abraham in his old age. He was 100 years old, she 90. The body that nature had closed decades earlier opened, and from those 2 old people a child was born, the son of the promise. The first real link of the nation that had been sworn to a man who had already stopped hoping. And what did they call him? Here is one of those winks you can only see in the original language. When God had announced to Abraham that he would have a son with Sarah, Abraham laughed. When Sarah heard it behind the tent, she also laughed, a bitter laugh, the laugh of the one who no longer believes, laughter of disbelief. And then God gave the child his name before he was born, and the name was Yitzhak, which in Hebrew means he will laugh, laughter. The name of the promised son is literally a burst of laughter. The same laughter that had been of doubt became laughter of joy. And Sarah said it herself, "God has made me laugh, and everyone who hears it will laugh with me." Heaven took the silent mockery of two old people and engraved it forever in the name of their son, as if to say, what you received laughing out of disbelief, you're now going to tell laughing out of joy. And if you've gotten this far, I want you to pause for a second with me, because what comes is the hardest and most beautiful scene in all of Abraham's life. And I want to ask you something before we enter it. When the next part ends, write in the comments a single word, I trust. Just that. Because we're going to talk about what it means to hand over what you love most without knowing why it's being asked of you. And I want to read how many of you have stood on that same mountain. Don't rush to write it yet. Stay. Climb the mountain with me first. Because the same God who for 25 years begged Abraham to trust in what was promised, one day asked him to kill it with his own hands. Take now your son, your only one, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains that I will tell you. Read it slowly, because every word is a knife. God did not say your son, he said your only one, whom you love, as if he wanted to make sure Abraham felt the full weight of what was being asked of him. That child was everything. He was the laughter, he was the miracle of two old people. He was the first link of the promised nation. He was the only way the plan to bless all the families of the earth could be fulfilled. And heaven asked him to put him on an altar. Imagine the 3 days of the journey, because the text gives them to you, and almost no one stops on them. 3 days walking beside the son you're going to lose. 3 nights sleeping at his side, knowing what you carry in your heart. 3 dawns watching him wake. Genesis tells us nothing of what Abraham thought in those 3 days. It only tells us that he rose very early, split the wood, and walked. The heaviest obedience in the Bible fits into dry verbs. He rose, he split, he went, and on the 3rd day, Abraham lifted his eyes and saw the place from afar. He left the servants at the foot of the mountain and said a sentence that is going to matter enormously. I and the boy will go over there. We will worship, and we will return to you. We will return. Plural. We don't know whether it was pure faith or desperate hope. But the man said, the 2 of us will return. And then he put the wood on Isaac's shoulders, took the fire and the knife himself, and they went up together. The father carrying the fire and the blade, the son carrying the wood on which he was to be offered. And the 2 went up together, the text says. Twice it repeats it, like a heartbeat, and the 2 walked together. And in the middle of the climb, the child's voice. My father, here is the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering? And Abraham answered with the sentence that would become the heart of everything. God will provide for himself the lamb, my son. And they kept walking, the 2, together. They reached the top. Abraham built the altar, arranged the wood, and then he bound his son. Imagine that instant in all its rawness, a father's hands tying up his son, the son letting himself be tied, the 2 in a silence the text fills with nothing. Abraham put Isaac on the wood, stretched out his hand, took the knife, raised it. And in the last possible second, when the blade was already on high, heaven cried out his name, Abraham, Abraham. Do not stretch out your hand against the boy, nor do anything to him. For now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld from me your son, your only one. Abraham lifted his eyes, and there, caught by its horns in a thicket, was a ram, a substitute. He took it and offered it in place of his son. The lamb that was missing was not brought by Abraham. It was provided by God, exactly as Abraham had said, without knowing how right he was. And to that mountain Abraham gave a name. He called it in Hebrew with a word related to see, and to provide. The Eternal will see, the Eternal will provide, Jehovah Jireh. And the text adds that this is why it's still said, on the mountain of the Eternal, it will be provided. There's an ancient tradition, which it's worth taking as a tradition and not as a closed fact of the text, that identifies that mountain of Moriah with the same place where centuries later, the Temple of Jerusalem would be raised. The mountain where a father did not have to hand over his son because God provided the substitute would be the mountain where an entire people would bring their sacrifices. The name remained like an oath to the future. On this mountain God provides, and here, if you've been paying attention, you should be starting to feel the weight of where this funnel is going. A father, an only and beloved son, wood loaded on the son's shoulders, climbing a mountain, a sacrifice stopped by God's provision. I'm not going to tell you what to think of those images. I only ask you to keep them, because the Bible itself is going to use them again much, much later. Abraham came down from the mountain with his son alive, and that covenant, tested in the fire, kept descending toward that son. Only here Genesis does something almost no one comments on, and that says a lot about how heaven works. Because of the three great patriarchs, Isaac is the quiet one, the one with no adventure of his own. His father Abraham crossed deserts following a voice, argued with God over an entire city, raised the knife on a mountain. His son Jacob will dream of stairways to heaven and wrestle with a stranger until dawn. Isaac, between the two, does almost nothing spectacular. He is the only one of the three who never left the promised land, the only one who had a single wife, the only one whose name God never changed, the heir whose job at bottom was one thing only: to survive and to pass the promise intact to the next hand. And that, though it makes no noise, is also part of the funnel. There are generations that carry the torch across the desert, and there are generations whose greatness consists in not letting it fall. Isaac was one of the second kind, and sometimes the most silent link is the one that holds the whole chain. When Isaac was of age to marry, Abraham, now very old, refused to look for a wife among the daughters of Canaan, the people in whose land he lived, but whose gods were not his. He sent his most faithful servant back to the land of his kindred, far away, to look among his own for the woman who would carry the promise forward. And the servant, arriving at a well as evening fell, did something beautiful. He asked God for a concrete sign, that the young woman he asked for a drink, and who not only gave to him but also offered to draw water for all his camels, and that one would be the chosen one. And it's worth understanding the weight of that test. Drawing water by hand for 10 thirsty camels was not a gesture of courtesy, it was hours of work, jar after jar, bucket after bucket. It was a test of character disguised as kindness. And before the servant finished praying, a young woman named Rebecca arrived, gave him a drink, and then said the exact words he was waiting for. "I will also draw water for your camels until they finish drinking." The promise found its next bearer, not for her beauty, though she had it, but for a heart that served without anyone asking. Rebecca married Isaac. And then Genesis repeats, with a coldness that makes you shudder, exactly the same problem as before. Rebecca was barren again. The grandfather had waited for the miracle with a barren wife until almost 100. And now the son, the miracle itself, the child they had called laughter, found that his own wife could not give him children. The promise of offspring, as numerous as the stars, hung again from a single thread, a closed womb. And stop here, because this is one of the most astonishing patterns in all of Genesis, and practically no one points it out. The chosen nation was on the verge of not existing, not once, but again and again, always for the same cause. A woman who could not conceive, Sarah barren until old age, Rebecca barren in the middle of her youth, and later Jacob's beloved wife Rachel also barren, also desperate, until the text says that God remembered her and heard her. 3 generations in a row, 3 times the line on the verge of going out in an empty womb, as if heaven wanted to leave engraved again and again a message impossible to misinterpret. This people does not exist because nature produced it. It exists because God opened it. Every link of this chain is literally a miracle against biology. Isaac did not resign himself. He did the only thing he knew his father would have done. He pleaded with the Eternal for his wife. And the text says, with enormous simplicity, that the Eternal heard him, and Rebekah conceived. They had been married 20 years when at last that pregnancy came. 20 years of waiting and of heaven's silence. And when it finally came, it did not come with one son. It came with two. Twins. And with those two twins in the womb, the funnel was once again on the verge of breaking, this time in a war of brothers. The twins fought from before they were born. The text says that the children struggled within their mother's womb, and that the Eternal announced to her that there were two nations in her, and that the elder would serve the younger. The first to come out was Esau, red and hairy. Behind him, gripping his brother's heel, came the second, and for that gesture they gave him his name, in Hebrew, Yaakov, which comes from the word for heel and means something like the one who grabs the heel, the one who supplants, the one who comes from behind. From the first second, the child's name was a warning. This one came to take what was not his by birth, and he fulfilled his name. One day, Esau came from the field dying of hunger, and Jacob sold him a plate of lentil stew in exchange for the birthright, the right of the elder son. Esau, for a plate of food, despised what an entire inheritance was worth. And years later, with the complicity of his mother, Jacob disguised himself as his brother, deceived his father Isaac, who was already blind, and stole from him too the blessing of the firstborn. The supplanter supplanted to the end, and he had to flee because Esau swore to kill him. Here is where the story takes a turn you wouldn't expect, because that man, a trickster, a thief of blessings who was fleeing from his own brother, is exactly the man God chose to carry the line forward. Not the honest Esau, the cunning Jacob. The channel did not pass through the one who seemed to deserve it. It passed through the one God chose, and that in itself was already a message. And in the middle of his flight, alone, in the middle of nowhere, with a stone for a pillow, Jacob had a dream. He saw a ladder resting on the earth whose top touched heaven, and angels of God going up and down on it. And at the top was the Eternal, repeating to him, to the fleeing trickster, the same oath he had made to his grandfather Abraham. In you and in your descendants all the families of the earth shall be blessed. Jacob woke trembling and said, "Surely the Eternal is in this place, and I did not know it." Stop a second on that, because it's one of the most surprising things in all his story. Heaven did not wait for Jacob to fix his life. It did not wait for him to ask forgiveness for having deceived his blind father, nor to repair what he had stolen from his brother. It appeared to him right in the middle of his flight, with his hands still dirty from the deception, sleeping on the ground of an open field like the fugitive he was. And what it showed him was not a threat or a reproach. It was a ladder that joined the earth with heaven, planted exactly above his head on the worst and loneliest night of his life. It was as if the Eternal were telling him that not even in his most shameful flight, not in his lowest hour, was he outside the reach of that old promise made in Ur. And to that place he gave the name in Hebrew, Bet-El, which means house of God. None of this was fulfilled because Jacob was good. It was fulfilled because God is faithful to a word he cut alone on a night of fire with the grandfather of that fugitive. 20 years passed. Jacob married, had children, grew rich, and at last decided to go back home, knowing he would have to face the brother he had betrayed. And the night before the reunion, the strangest scene of all his life occurred. Jacob stayed alone at the bank of a river, and suddenly in the darkness a man grabbed him and they wrestled. They wrestled all night, hand to hand, without either one winning, until dawn broke. The mysterious adversary touched Jacob's thigh and dislocated it, but Jacob, wounded and all, did not let go of him. And he said a sentence that defines him entirely: "I will not let you go unless you bless me." The one who all his life had grabbed heels, this time grabbed hold of God and did not let go. And then the adversary asked him his name. "Jacob," he answered, "the supplanter." And the answer changed history. "You shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel." In Hebrew, Yisrael, a word that joins the verb to struggle with the name of God, El, and that the text itself explains this way, "Because you have struggled with God and with men and have prevailed." The trickster received a new name just like his grandfather, but this name did not mean father of multitudes. It meant the one who struggles with God. And to that ford of the river, Jacob gave the name Peniel, which in Hebrew means face of God, because he said, "I saw God face to face and my life was delivered." He came out of that struggle limping, renamed and wounded at the same time, and that new name, Israel, did not stay with him. It became the name of an entire people. The nation God promised to an old man of Ur would forever bear the name of a man who struggled all night and refused to let go. Israel had 12 sons. 12, and from those 12 would be born the 12 tribes of a people. The channel, which had begun with a single childless man, now had 12 branches. The promise was alive, growing, multiplying, and then, right when everything seemed to be going upward, one of those 12 sons, the favorite, was thrown into a pit by his own brothers and sold as a slave to some merchants on their way to Egypt. And with that sold boy bound, weeping on the road to a foreign land, begins the last stretch of our funnel, the stretch that is going to end in a coffin. The boy was named Joseph. He was the son Israel loved most, the one of his old age, the one of the wife who had died, and his father didn't even hide it. He had given him a special tunic that set him apart from all the others, and as if the favoritism weren't enough, Joseph had 2 dreams and committed the imprudence of telling them aloud. He dreamed that everyone was binding sheaves in the field, and that his sheaf rose upright while those of his brothers bowed in a circle around it. He then dreamed that the sun, the moon, and 11 stars bowed down before him. His brothers understood the message perfectly. This boy sees himself reigning over all of us. And they hated him. They hated him so much that one day, far from home, they threw him into a dry cistern, took away the tunic the father had given him, and sat down to eat at the edge of the pit while he pleaded from the bottom. Then they sold him for 20 pieces of silver to a caravan of merchants, dipped the tunic in goat's blood, and told old Israel that a wild beast had devoured his son. The father tore his garments and refused to be comforted, weeping for a son who was actually alive, walking in chains on the road to Egypt. And here, right here, the whole funnel seems about to break. The great-grandson of Abraham, the bearer of the oath through the chosen line, ended up as merchandise, sold by his own brothers, a slave in a strange country that worshipped other gods. If you wanted to destroy the plan to bless all the families of the earth, this was the perfect moment. And yet, listen to what the text repeats again and again in the following chapters, like a stubborn refrain. And the Eternal was with Joseph. In the house of his master, an Egyptian official who ended up entrusting to him everything he owned, until that man's wife tried to drag him into betrayal and, seeing herself rejected, falsely accused him. In the prison where they locked him up for having refused to do evil. At the lowest bottom of his descent, heaven was still with him. The promise did not travel on a throne, it traveled in a cell. Years passed, and inside the prison something happened that hurts to tell, because anyone who has waited in vain recognizes it. Joseph interpreted a dream for a fellow prisoner, the former cupbearer of Pharaoh, and announced to him that in 3 days he would be freed and restored to his post. He was right. And he asked the man one single thing. "When you're back in the palace, remember me. Speak of me to Pharaoh. Get me out of here." The cupbearer went out, recovered his life, his cup, his place beside the king. And the text finishes with devastating words. And he did not remember him, but forgot him. 2 whole years, Genesis says, 2 more years, Joseph was locked up because of another's forgetting. What was promised, again, waiting in the dark, hanging from a memory that failed. Until one night, Pharaoh himself had 2 dreams that no sage of Egypt could decipher, and only then did the cupbearer finally remember the boy in the prison. Joseph interpreted them. 7 years of abundance are coming, he told him, and then 7 years of a famine so terrible that the land will forget what it is to eat. And he proposed to him a plan to store grain during the good years. Pharaoh, astonished, did something unthinkable. He took a foreign slave out of prison and set him to govern all of Egypt, second only to himself. The one who had been thrown into a pit now administered the largest granary in the known world. And then the famine came. And it did not come only to Egypt, it came to the whole region, including the land where an old man named Israel was starving with his sons, the same ones who had sold Joseph. And they heard that in Egypt there was bread, and they went down to buy it, and they bowed, without recognizing him, before the Egyptian governor in front of them, without knowing that it was the brother they had thrown into the pit. Keep that image, because it's one of the most perfect circles in the whole account. Do you remember the dreams of that boy, the one of the sheaves that bowed, the one of the sun and the stars prostrating themselves? His brothers had hated him precisely for daring to dream that one day they would kneel before him. And now there they were, on their knees, begging for bread, before the very brother whose dream they had tried to bury in a cistern. They didn't know it. The dream was being fulfilled to the letter, and it had been them with their own hands who pushed it until it became reality. The one they had tried to erase from the earth was now the only one who could keep them alive. I'm not going to tell you here every tear of the reunion, because that scene deserves its own space. There is, though, a detail I can't skip, because it closes another perfect circle. Joseph, still without making himself known, subjected his brothers to a final test. He hid a silver cup in the sack of Benjamin, the youngest, the only other son of his same mother, and threatened to keep him as a slave. And then one of the brothers stepped forward to plead for the boy. It was Judah, the same Judah who years earlier had been the one who proposed selling Joseph to the merchants. And he offered himself as a slave in place of the youngest, so as not to see his father lose another son. The man who once sold a brother was now selling himself to save another. And on seeing that transformation, Joseph could no longer hold the mask. What matters for our journey is the sentence Joseph said to them when he finally made himself known, trembling, weeping so loudly that they heard him in the palace. His brothers expected revenge, and Joseph told them instead the sentence that sums up the whole funnel, one of the most profound sentences in all the Bible. You thought evil against me, but God directed it to good, to do what we see today, to keep many people alive. You thought it, God directed it. The betrayal of men and the plan of heaven running down the same riverbed without the one cancelling the other. The pit, the sale, the prison, all the pain, had been the long road by which God kept the family of the promise alive in the middle of a famine that should have killed it. And so old Israel, who had left Canaan as a single man following a voice, went down to Egypt, turned into a family. The text stops to count them one by one, all the souls of the house of Jacob who entered Egypt, and it gives a number, 70 souls. It's worth noting, to be honest, that there's a difference between the versions. The Hebrew text says 70, while the ancient Greek translation, the one the book of Acts in the New Testament quotes, says 75. The difference comes from which descendants are included in the count, but the point is the same, and it's astonishing if you stop on it. The funnel had reached its narrowest point. Of all the humanity scattered at Babel, the blessing promised to the whole world was now concentrated in barely 70 people, refugees from the famine in a corner of Egypt. 70 people who carried, without fully knowing it, the destiny of all the families of the earth. And do you remember the number I asked you to keep at the very beginning? 70 nations, that old tradition counted, had come out of the sons of Noah and had covered the earth after Babel. And now 70 souls went down to Egypt carrying the promise made to Abraham. That same tradition saw in that coincidence something deliberate, almost written on purpose. The whole world had burst into 70 peoples, and the seed destined to bless those 70 peoples fit itself in another 70 people. The funnel, at its narrowest point, still kept the shape of complete humanity. Like a drop that preserves, shrunk down, the whole map of the sea it came from. Israel embraced Joseph again after believing him dead for 22 years. He lived his last years in Egypt, surrounded by his children, and before dying he blessed each one. And when he died, Joseph ordered the Egyptian physicians to embalm him, according to the custom of that land, a process that the text itself says took 40 days, and all Egypt mourned him 70 days. Then Joseph went up with a great caravan to Canaan, and buried him in the promised land, in the cave that Abraham himself had bought generations earlier. The one who had stopped halfway in Haran, Terah, never reached the land. Israel, his descendant, at least returned to it dead on the shoulders of his sons. And in the end, Joseph remained, the last of the great ones, the one who had been sold, imprisoned, raised to the very top. Joseph lived 110 years. He saw his great-grandchildren, and when his hour came, he gathered his brothers and his family, and told them some last words that closed the entire book of Genesis, and that changed the whole meaning of what seemed a happy ending. He told them, "I am dying, but God will surely visit you, and will bring you up from this land to the land he swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. He will visit you, he will bring you up." Joseph knew something. He knew that Egypt was not the destination. He knew that that comfortable corner, full of grain, where the family was finally safe, was actually another Haran, another waiting room, and that's why he asked for something strange, the last thing the Bible says of him in Genesis. He did not ask to be buried in Canaan immediately like his father. He made the children of Israel swear, made them promise, that when God visited them and brought them out of Egypt, they would carry his bones with them. And then Joseph died at 110 years. And they embalmed him, and he was put in a coffin in Egypt. There Genesis ends. Not with a wedding, not with a throne, not with a glorious nation. It ends with a closed coffin in a foreign country. Do you remember the promise of that night of fire and terror when the Eternal passed alone between the split animals? 400 years of servitude, he had said, and afterward they will come out. Joseph had just died. And between his death and the day that people would come out of Egypt turned into a multitude, those 400 years were going to pass. 400 years in which that coffin stayed there, waiting. Generation after generation of Israelites were born and died, knowing that somewhere there was a casket that could not be buried yet, because its owner had sworn that it would only move on the day God fulfilled his word. That coffin was a promise in the shape of a box. Every time someone looked at it, they remembered, we're not staying. God is going to visit us. We're going to leave. And they left. Centuries later, when at last that people came out of Egypt, in the middle of the chaos and the haste of the departure, the text of Exodus stops to note a single small detail, easy to overlook. And Moses took with him the bones of Joseph. Someone remembered. Someone kept a 400-year oath, and that coffin at last began to move toward the promised land. And look at the contrast we opened with. The book began with the almost mute death of a man who saved the whole world, and it ends with the death of another man who saved only his family, with his bones kept in a box, waiting. The greatest thing of heaven, all the families of the earth, resting on the smallest thing, a single family. 70 people, refugees from the famine in a corner of Egypt. That was the answer to why him. God never set Abraham apart from the world to abandon the world. He set him apart to have, within the world, a single line of people through whom, one day, the blessing promised in that tent in Ur would pour out again over all the families of the earth. The funnel did not narrow to leave people out. It narrowed to aim better. And an old man from Ur, a laugh called Isaac, a trickster renamed at the bank of a river, and a slave raised to a throne, were the names through which that aim of heaven passed. Joseph's coffin waited 400 years, and it moved. That box that waited in Egypt is telling you something, and I'm not going to explain it to you. The promises God cuts alone, one night between the fire and the darkness, do not expire because they're delayed. They only wait for the day of the visit. Joseph died without seeing the land, but he made them swear his bones would arrive. Because there are people who cling to a promise with such force that they refuse to let go of it even in death. On the screen, another video has just appeared. It's not a second part of this one, nor the continuation of anything. It's a different story that I chose because I think it converses with what you've just heard. I'm not going to promise you it will change your life, nor that it's the most striking thing you'll see today. I only tell you that it's there, waiting, just as that coffin waited. If you want to keep going a little longer, click it and let's go. And if you prefer to stay a moment in silence with all this, close your eyes and let it settle. That's fine too. You decide when.